Thank you for tuning in to the Bully Pew podcast, brought to you by Protestia, protestia.com, where you can find the latest in Christian polemics and discernment news. Sign up for our insurgency email blast and support us financially if you would be so kind over at patreon.com/Protestia. It is Friday, July 17th, 2026, and I am in Studio C, otherwise known as the car, driving across Metro Denver and recording the Bully Pew podcast for you fine listeners out there, both insider supporters and lovable freeloaders. Those of you that we wish that you would join up financially, but understand that everybody's life circumstances are different, and we appreciate you being on the Bully Pew podcast, listening to it. In any case, we have historically used that term freeloaders as a tongue-in-cheek term of affection. It doesn't always get received that way, but my position on that is really if being called a freeloader in a tongue-in-cheek fashion is going to make you clutch your pearls and not want to listen or not like us or whatever, you're probably not going to last as far as the other stuff that we talk about, because we delve into controversial topics. And yeah, we ruffle feathers. We publish and post things that a lot of, especially larger figures in evangelicalism, would prefer we not post, not publish, not talk about. And yet here we are. We are blessed to, in this ministry, really have a long list at this point. And not that we're collecting or counting or anything like that, but just off the top of my head, a list of good men doing difficult work in the pastoral office and other ministries, raising their families in the admonition of Christ and of Scripture, and we are blessed to count them as our supporters and our brothers in arms, so to speak. This is spiritual warfare we are always engaged in. The world that we currently inhabit, this place, is destined to one day be destroyed, be wiped out, and be replaced with a new earth, new heavens and a new earth. And the place that we are in right now is corrupted by sin. It is ruled over, in some sense, by the dark one, as Jesus gathers his people to himself, builds his kingdom, gathers his spiritual brothers and sisters. Those of us that are saved, brought into right relationship with God the Father. Jesus is described as the firstborn of many brethren, raising from the dead, so that you and I might be raised from the dead as well by placing our faith, hope, and trust in Jesus Christ. That is the current status, the current church age in the world that we live in, and it has been we have. I guess I would argue a pretty novel, or really historically and generationally unique moment right now that we are in terms of the grounds on which this battle is fought. I am old enough now to have really grown up with really computers being a thing, but then as the internet grew to become what it was, and then the next stage of that becoming the larger social media platforms and media creation and distribution outlets, and it's very clear that the debate, the conversation, the grounds upon which a lot of the spiritual warfare is being fought is digital, and we would be lying to ourselves if we didn't recognize that a good portion of our psyche and our emotions and our communications and sort of our the place that we're in, the place that we're abiding, the place that we reside is online at this point. These communications happening on social media, routinely. I mean, I can count a big long list of people that I would consider friends that I haven't even met in real life, like haven't even met in person. And yet we've conversed and we've had conversations and we've read each other's work. We have agreed and disagreed and fought and supported one another at all of this for years now. And we don't even meet. regularly in real life, if we ever have met at all. And that's just that is an odd dynamic that we need to make sure that we are cognizant of. In the case of some of the issues that we've been discussing lately, like we just recently posted a kind of a different format of a Protesty Tonight on YouTube. It's on Patreon as well, Rumble, places like that. Dealing with the resurgence of the so-called curse of Ham, brought to you by Dale Partridge, who is a pastor of I don't know, and nothing against small churches, but not particularly influential in the real world, so to speak, but certainly has gathered a little bit of a following online, as is wont to happen. That tends to happen that way. But regurgitating, recirculating a long discredited theory and really false exegesis of Scripture to try to explain disparate social outcomes by different racial taxonomies in the modern age, and looking to the this really biblically indefensible version of the curse on Canaan to be somehow a curse on his father Ham, and therefore all people groups that we can supposedly tie to the broader taxonomy of Ham, being one of Noah's sons. So if you remember the what the Bible teaches about this, the biblical narrative about the flood, 8 people on that ark, Noah, his wife, 3 sons, their wives, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And from, the Bible very clearly teaches that from those 3 brothers, from those 3 sons of Noah, all of the peoples of the world came to be. And you look at that, and some people will say, well, see, because of this, we can look at the broad, supposed racial categories, geographic / racial categories we're seeing in the world now, trace them directly back to these 3 brothers. Apparently the brothers must have they must have said, okay, we're going to procreate with our wives. We're going to have children. And then those children are going to marry and mate with their siblings? No, that's probably not what happened. Probably what happened is the sons of Shem, sons of Japheth, sons of Shem, probably married cousins rather than brothers and sisters. We would hope anyway. That would make a lot more sense. But even presuming that didn't happen, you still have to this argument that they're basically making, where hey, no possible bloodlines were crossed between the progeny of the 3 brothers. They just sort of went their own way, did their own thing, went their own geographic direction. They said, okay, I'm going to go populate, this continent down here that we don't even know exists at this point. We're just going to presume it's there. So I'm going to head down to Africa, and, I'll be down there, and then you guys can sort of, you, Shem, can sort of hang out in the Middle East, and then Japheth, you go north. We'll sort of make that agreement now. No intermingling, of course, or anything like this. Obviously it didn't happen that way. And yet the theory that's being pushed here is this idea that, somehow there was a curse, a temporal curse for this world that's clearly still in operation, as we can see, that was leveled against the descendants of Ham. Now, how much of a descendant of Ham you needed to be stuck with this curse, we'll never know, I guess. If you intermarry with a descendant of Japheth instead, or with Shem, you marry your cousin instead of your sibling. Is it 1% Hamites gets you into this curse? Does it require the geographic connection? Does it require the sociological connection? Like, do you have to be a member of the same nation? Do you need to be believing and practicing the same things from a religious standpoint, the same cultural things, the same institutions? What keeps this curse bound? And of course, for those that push and somehow believe this curse of Ham idea, the only thing that can possibly hold it together is genetics. and of course, loosely, right? So, I guess once your skin is dark enough, then you're clearly part of the curse. Or once your skin is light enough, you might be, a little away from the curse. Maybe it's on a scale. Maybe it's like, hey, if you are you have a black parent and a white parent, and so you're born with, you have skin that's somewhere in the middle on here. Are you half cursed? I mean, how exactly does this function? And of course, nobody answers it, because what they're trying to do is no pun intended here, whitewash this curse of Ham theory, so that they don't actually, so that they can point fingers at the disparities of different racial groups and blame it on something other than the real reasons, which are much more difficult to discuss. They're much harder to understand. It takes a lot more work. It's way easier just to say, well, there's actually a secret part of the scripture up here in Genesis 9. There's a secret part of the scripture that makes clear what's going on here. Everything, every disparate outcome, we can point to scripture and say, hey, God ordained it to be this way. He ordained it to be this way. That this people group would act like this over here, while our people group would be spared from acting like this. And of course, ironically, what you don't realize is the same people that are pushing this will still check the boxes of orthodoxy in a lot of other places. And so they'll still be the same ones that say, hey, salvation is available to all. The people of God will be collected from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And, so therefore, I mean, if salvation is available to all can be saved, you believe in Jesus Christ, you will be saved. If that's true, then this supposed temporal curse they're talking about, and by the way, like, there's no indication of when this will supposedly be lifted, although a lot of the characters pushing this notion are post-millennialist, so presumably it will be lifted at some point later down the road. This curse will be less and less of a thing, I guess, as these other people groups are Christianized. Then we'd have to presume that the people of African genetic lineage who come to Christ, I mean, we presume that lifts the curse, right? I mean, in Dale Partridge's video, he didn't really talk about that. He talked about the world being Christianized and getting better and better and better as the gospel spreads. But in the meantime, he gave the method by which this would happen as well, white colonialization. And he would just shift categories. Like, well, I'm going to talk about whites here, and then Europeans. I'm going to talk about whites versus, Africans. Even though white is a broad racial taxonomy, and African is not. African is obviously geographical. But he would just shift, back and forth between categories at will for whatever phraseology needed to suit the present argument. But not realizing apparently that offering this curse of Ham theory as an excuse or as a reason why there's disparate outcomes in different racial groups around the world and in the United States, not realizing he's kind of giving those sins and the people committing those sins a get out of responsibility free card. I mean, so if your people group is supposedly saddled with this curse, with this special curse, because of what? Because one guy sinned against his father a long time ago. Now your whole racial group is cursed. You're going to be less intelligent and less capable and have worse social outcomes and all of this. Why would people of African lineage, of black people, why would they not be able then to look at somebody like Dale Partridge and say, hey, your sin is your fault, but my sin isn't my fault. I mean, I was cursed. Through no choice of my own. I'm dealing with this Hamitic curse. I have a harder time coming to Christ. They're basically like this curse of Ham theory is basically giving a reason for affirmative action. It's like spiritual affirmative action. They're put upon because of this curse. I mean, if this theory is correct, that the curse was not on Canaan, but instead was on Ham for some reason. If that's true, then we got to be patient, because we got to expect that black people are going to act this way, and And these sins, I mean, can they really be held responsible for what they're doing here? I mean, if they're bearing this additional curse, that's the logical category that we get into with all of this. But the bigger concern, I don't know if I'd say it's the bigger concern, but certainly I think an overarching sort of umbrella concern with all of this, and those of us that, unfortunately spend a good amount of time online and doing things online, we see this every day. But there is a real serious problem with people's ability to think categorically, reason through things categorically, be able to deduce and work through something logically. And people propagating things like the curse of Ham, and really they're regurgitating these old, long disproven, long discredited tropes and things like this. They take advantage of that because they realize that the internet does not require people to, it doesn't hold them accountable for, wild insanity when it comes to the way that they think and reason and determine things. In fact, it feeds into somebody's ability to reason emotionally, just pop off emotionally. It gives an outlet to that because there's no consequences for saying things that are ridiculous, making claims that are ridiculous. The internet does give people the ability to curate their own reality. Well, when you give somebody who is bearing a sin nature, even a Christian, but I would certainly say for those who are not saved, or perhaps those who are saying that they're Christian and they're not, plenty of those, of course. That's a pretty big category numerically. When you give those people who are bearing sin nature and struggling with their sin nature the opportunity to curate their own reality, be their own boss, their own God, their own center of the universe, what do we think that's going to be? Well, of course, it's going to be a place where illogic and ill temperament and subjectivity and emotionality rule, and logic and categorical thinking and real intelligence and real humility that comes from a person being subject to God's laws and ways of thinking and ways of reasoning rather than the other way around. That's not going to win the day in a lot of cases. It's going to have to be, people that are going to be logical and categorical and think clearly and communicate clearly are going to be fighting an uphill battle, not only against, perhaps some of the more challenging parts of their own nature, but against the ground itself, against the field of play itself, the online field of play, which, so for instance, you can put something online that's strongly detailed, strongly researched, strongly cited, strongly reasoned, strongly supported by scripture, and you can spend a ton of time putting something like this together, and you're still going to get people who respond to it like, you didn't make any actual arguments, and then they just post that, right? It's just like, and not even seeing the irony. Oh, that's stupid. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're that. And they just and I guess, obviously they're not helping themselves. They're not advancing the conversation. But they are, presumably, we would assume that they are making themselves feel better for a second. They are feeding their emotions. They are scratching their itching ears, to borrow biblical phraseology. And yet, there are no consequences for that externally. Are they doing damage to themselves? Are they sinning? Yeah, in a lot of cases. Piling up condemnation on themselves? Yeah, in a lot of cases. But in terms of there being external consequences, those don't come by the internet, by the actual ground that we're fighting the battle on. And I am about as close to a free speech absolutist as one can get. And so I'm not saying that we should somehow try to control people's speech or expression or things like that, or force them to use their real names or something when they communicate or things like that. I think that somebody's right to privacy outweighs our rights to have a better conversation online. But we just have to deal with reality that online conversation is going to be formed in the image of the people who are engaging in it, and that's a sinful image. That's an image of sinful nature. It's going to take on that characteristic, and it's going to become even more difficult as we move forward. And it looks like there is nothing that's going to be slowing down generative AI anytime soon. So somebody's ability to, and it's already, and maybe this will be a good thing in the end, but it's already sort of polluting the content ecosystem online, where stuff that is being generated by AI is not seen as AI, or things that are not using generative AI are being accused of being AI. People don't really have and this includes me. I mean, I'm in the same bucket. I do not have a fully formed sort of ethical framework for where I think the line should be on using generative AI tools. We've discussed this a little bit in the past, but basically coming up with or having a standard by which we could say, because we would have to say, well, this technology is okay, this technology is permissible, but once it gets to this point, all of a sudden it's wrong. Like, not only do you have to have a reason why you've drawn the line where you have, where you have to have a logical, ethical, moral reason for where that line is between, hey, this is okay, and then I've stepped over this far, so now it's wrong. You have to have that line, but you even have to develop an ethical or moral reasoning for why one technology, for why it's okay to use the technology you use and yet not use other technology. Like it's a very complicated, I would argue, very complicated ethical and moral dilemma that we're faced with at this point. I see, I'm not the prophet, not the son of a prophet, but I would predict that as generative AI gets more and more realistic, blurs the lines more and more between, human created content, or the kind of stuff we are typically used to on the internet, where you read something and you're sure, okay, that was written by a person. Or you see a video or hear some audio and you say, okay, yeah, that's definitely a person. You hear this podcast and you say that's definitely a guy, like a named person with a physical location and like he really exists. The more and more that AI blurs that line, and it's going to render social media in particular, but the internet almost as a whole, as a untrustworthy. Like, the default position will be, this is untrustworthy. The default position will be, I can't trust this. And that might end up being a good thing, because right now people's commitment to the digital framework of being online and sort of, they're living half their life in sort of this digital realm. I don't think that's very healthy anyway. So if that idea, the idea that you can and should live half your life online and really exist there, becomes something that is manifestly untrustworthy on a fundamental level, maybe that'll be a good thing. Maybe that will return people back to needing real, tangible, in-person interaction. People have talked about an AI bubble that's going to burst like the .com bubble of the early 2000s. Will that happen? I don't know, was the .com bubble the end of the 90s? Or, it was around the turn of the millennium there. We saw, people were just throwing money left and right at anything that was .com, thinking that, it'll never burst, it'll never turn around. It's, this rising tide of the internet will raise all boats, no matter how lame the boat is. and then it burst and people lost a lot of money. This is, and that may happen with AI as well. Although you have so many of the big tech companies, the big stalwarts who are invested in this, that they'll probably have the ability to modulate back down without losing their shirts. But there'll be a lot of companies, investors, and things that lose money on it if it happens this way. But in terms of our use of it, the Christian use of it, or our interaction with it as it is, if the trustworthiness of the internet continues to degrade by way of what is colloquially called AI slop, just reams and reams and reams and reams of low value, low investment, kind of content online, it may reach a point where people are saying, I really don't want any of it. And they'll throw out the baby with the bathwater. So the current quote unquote legitimate content, if you want to call it that, that's online right now, that people are actually spending a lot of time and a lot of research and a lot of production time to put out there, will also be distrusted and not be used, basically seen in the same light as the AI, as the fake stuff, as the AI stuff. And again, there'll be some negative consequences of that, but there might be some positive consequences as well. We're going to get to the point where we won't be fighting so much over the argumentation itself. It'll be kind of the same way it is now, where we're not fighting so much over argumentation, but we're fighting about the facts themselves. Who actually said something that is provably true. And then because an AI engine, a difference engine, presumably if it's set up logically, it will apply correct logic. So you're going to see things where when people are making bad argumentation, when they're being illogical, when they are using rhetorical tricks, when they're engaging in logical fallacies, in the same way that again, we talked about earlier, Dale's video, just logical fallacy after logical fallacy after logical fallacy, category errors on top of category errors. That will be really easy to expose that part of it, and then we'll be stuck talking about, okay, let's look at actual, what actual evidence is legit versus what's being exaggerated versus what's being left out. So there is a potential for this to be very helpful in terms of broader discussions. But I see a time at which, in the not so distant future, where people will basically unplug and say, we're not, and it'll be up to the platforms to either, if they want to survive, to really, wrap their hands around this. A good example of this has been apparently X, formerly Twitter, has had quite a problem because they have a content creator kind of a program, like a revenue sharing kind of a program. Once your X account is big enough, has enough engagement, they will share revenue, presumably based off of the idea that, hey, when people engage with your content, they also watch ads that X can sell, and so they're encouraging people to put their content on X and share in this sort of creator revenue pool. And they've had a problem with people on X basically just instead of resharing something or reposting, we used to call it a retweet, but if they repost, instead of reposting something that someone else has put up there, they instead they go download or screen capture something, that person's stuff, and they put it on their own channel and thereby capture the revenue for themselves. And so now, Twitter's AI, Grok, or whatever they're calling the internal one, is getting better at sniffing out when people have simply taken somebody else's content and put it on their own channel in order to demonetize that content and make sure the monetization gets back to the original creator. So some things like that might have a chance at staving this off, but it's basically kind of a tech arms race to see which AI will be the best at doing things. I think it's going to be a lot like the way that sort of smart technology and automation and things like that have gone, where, we used to see commercials where somebody would tell their Google or their Amazon device or whatever to do something, and it would do it, and people were like, oh, wow, that's cool. And then they realized that the thing that was being done was something that would be easier just to do in person. Like it was more of a parlor trick than something that actually was helpful. And considering the technology needs to be updated and maintained and replaced, and sometimes it malfunctions and is dependent on other dependencies, it became something where people were like, okay, I can just unlock my door myself, or I can just turn these lights on myself, or it's a neat trick, but it doesn't actually improve anything in my actual life. So I think that AI will wind up facing probably some of the same pushback, or some of the same return to the point where it's not the neat, cool parlor trick that it seems like it is in the beginning, but rather people are going to be using little bits and pieces of it here and there. We've already seen lawyers get basically strung up for preparing court documents and things like this using generative AI, and the AI makes up cases and makes up citations, and people just run with it. Obviously, we've seen moments where people have used generative AI to write articles, and then they've left like the AI instructions in the copy paste. That happens. I've certainly used it to do research and gather information and try to keep things organized before putting some out there. Again, I think it's going to be a matter of people putting their foot down and saying, we don't want it to be done this way, or, hey, we're only going to trust you as a content creator if you offer disclaimers and promises and things that you're doing things a certain way. I can see all of that happening. But yeah, I'm certainly hoping that the generative AI as exists, that we can really develop a more robust, trust-based, ethical and moral framework for how it's used. Because again, you're going to get to the point where, and people come across our content every day that have never seen it before. So you're going to get to the point where they're wondering, okay, are these real people or not? And that's a fair question. Does David exist in real life? That will be a fair question to be asked. And I don't know exactly what that means, but I can see it being extraordinarily like changing the landscape, where we're almost going to see more of a return to full-time professional institutional journalism versus smaller sort of off the beaten path, blogs and independent creators and part-timers or hobbyists or things also involved in the practice of journalism, because they won't be able to distinguish between themselves and artificial content and content that doesn't have people behind it. Not really. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, thanks for riding around with me for a little while on this episode of the Bully P podcast. Stay tuned to Protestia as always for your latest in Christian polemics and discernment news. I'll talk to you guys again real soon. As always, Semper Reformanda.